Hello, everyone. Hello. Well, we've just had an incredibly intense morning of discussions. I think the last session about de-oligarchization, I can't say it, was particularly intense and fiery. And so I'm sure you've got plenty to digest. I'm sure you want to talk to your lunch companions. But I'm now going to give you some more food for thought, which is a question of what is happening to Ukraine's economy. The title of this session is Ukraine's economy, what can it contribute to the global economy, or what can Ukraine contribute to the global economy? Which in many ways is a lovely way to frame the question, because in the last few years, as Aliena has pointed out, it's usually been a case of what does the wider global economy, what do other countries need to do to support Ukraine? We're going to try and turn it round on its head and ask what Ukraine can contribute right now. And right now is a very delicate moment because we are coming, hopefully, out of the pandemic, which has caused devastating economic damage, but it's also given us a chance to rethink and recreate many of the economic structures and norms and assumptions that have shaped us in recent years. So it really is a time for fresh economic thinking and both pain and opportunity. And we have a fantastic group of people to talk about this. Vladislav Rashkovan, who's the Alternative Executive Director of the International Monetary Fund. Aliena Bilan, who's the Chief Economist of Dragon Capital here in Kiev. Taras Kachka, who is the Deputy Minister of Economy, Trade Representative of Ukraine. And David Rubenstein, who's joining us from Washington, who is the co-founder and co-chairman of the Carlyle Group. So we have a combination of politicians, economists, and also an actual investor who is looking at Ukraine and deciding whether it's worth investing there or not. So a good mix of perspectives. But I'd like to start with a very simple question, first of all, which is, before we can talk about whether Ukraine can contribute to the wider global economy, we need to also ask, what is the state of Ukraine's economy today? Because if you dial back 18 months ago, international development groups and economists were expecting growth of around 5% in 2020. In reality, the economy actually contracted 5% because of COVID, but not just COVID. Now, the EBRD is projecting growth of around 3 to 4% this year and next year, which is not bad, but not great. And it's not just COVID that's hanging on the economy. Issues around inflation, around corruption, around trade are also big headwinds. So perhaps I can start with you, Vladislav, ask you first of all, how do you evaluate from the perspective of the IMF, and I understand that the IMF is about to engage in more discussions with Ukraine, how do you evaluate the state of Ukraine's economy right now? And by the way, can I ask everyone who's at lunch to please hold off your conversations so that we can actually listen to what the speakers are saying and we don't have too much noise. So thank you.
Thanks, Julian. It's great to be here, now as not a moderator, but as a speaker. And I would agree first with your saying that situation in the Ukrainian economy is not bad, but not great. And not bad means that we went through the crisis not badly. I would say better than many other economies in the world and many other economies in Europe. And you may start thinking how it comes, and clearly there were few elements, few factors which affected that. One of them is Ukrainian economy, Ukrainian Minister of Finance had enough, I would say, fiscal space, to accommodate the potential, the additional expenditures to finance the health system and to finance the economy during the lockdown, to support the households during this period. And this was done, because there was some job done before by the ministers of finance. We have Natalka here, we have Oksana Markarova, we have Sasha Danylyuk, who did something, and now we have Sergei Marchenko, who did a lot of efforts in the previous years. I would say after 2016, in to to reduce the budget deficit in the economy, to reduce the debt in the economy, and therefore it allowed to accommodate these costs, the additional expenditures in the budget without a big problem. So this is the first thing. The second thing, which has been done before, is fixing the problems in the banking sector, and this is we discussed now on anti-oligarchic forum, the panel, but the banking sector will go through this crisis now, first time ever, when the banking sector was not requesting money from the state to be recapitalized or to support the depositors of the banks because the banks bankrupted. Instead, the banking sector was financing the economy, both private business and also the government, increasing the investment in the treasury bills and therefore supporting the government in order to deal with this with the economy. And I would say the third element which helped to go through the crisis not badly was the lockdown, in fact, that it was adaptive, if I use this word. So people adapted to the lockdown, which was not so much, very much strict. Therefore, today's situation in the economy is not bad, but the question is what next? How you need to grow. Because the idea of the IMF program is, and it's really written in the objective of the program, is that Ukraine need to have to catch up the peers, and therefore for this we need to have a higher growth than Poland or Hungary or Turkey, and that the global economy will grow like maybe 6+% this year, and if we go 4%, it means that we are deviate. So we are divergent from the growth of the global economy. And here, the IMF is happy to support the country to develop the policies, to address these issues. And the current program, which we have the standby arrangement, is actually focused on that, to help to keep the macro stability in the country and to prepare for the next round of the structural reforms when the window of opportunities will be. Coming back to the status of the program, we recently had like 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we had a call between the managing director of IMF and the president. The call went, I would say, fantastic, quoting one person on this call. There is a clear, commitments from the both sides, and both sides currently meet those commitments. And therefore, I really expect that in course of next 10 days, 12 days, we probably may start the mission, review mission, which also should lead to the, hopefully to reaching the staff level agreement and to some extension of the program to accommodate the future tranches.
Right, well, thank you very much indeed. Can I please ask once again for everyone to stop talking while our speakers are talking? I can see that this side of the room, if I was a school teacher, I would give this side of the room an A grade because they're sitting quietly. And I'd say there are some tables over there I'd probably give about an F grade. In fact, they're still talking so much they can't even see me because they are still talking. So once again, out of courtesy, can we please be quiet while the speakers are talking? So thank you. Aliena, would you agree that Ukrainian economy is kind of doing not bad? And what do you see as the major hurdles for it to catch up with some of the other more vibrant economies in the region at the moment?
Well, thank you again. Actually, it's very difficult to disagree with Vlad. I analyze Ukraine's economy for almost 20 years now, and my personal assessment that it's currently in a very good shape, actually. I would even describe it not as not bad, but as a good. And I genuinely believe that now Ukraine's credit rating is not reflecting the strengths of the economy already. We're still kind of a B country. The current credit ratings are lower than our historical highs, so we really deserve an upgrade. But the fundamental issue is, I again agree with Vladislav, is about the future growth and the sources of this growth. Because Ukraine's demographic trends are not supportive to growth. We have a shrinking and aging population. And we do have to invest in the country. Ukraine is underinvested in economy. So the ratio of investment to GDP is only 15%. This is a very low ratio. And I think that the problems for foreign investors are well known and has been discussed in this country for so many years that I will not tell you anything new. And we discussed it on previous panel. This is a rule of law. This is a fundamental problem. Our company, together with the European Business Association and the Center for Economic Strategy, each year we run a foreign investor survey. So we ask foreign investors, what is the biggest impediment for you to invest in the country? So the panel of these investors are both portfolio and strategic, those who already invested and who are kind of considering. And 6 years in a row, we have the one and the same #1 impediment. This is a judicial system, not even corruption. Like corruption was #1 for 5 years. Last year, we had the #1 is a judicial system and rule of law. So that's a simple answer to your question, but it's a very difficult issue to solve.
Right. Well, I was going to turn to Minister Kachka next, but I think it may be worth bringing in David Rubenstein, since you are one of the big investors prowling the world looking for opportunities. What right now do you think about the Ukrainian economy in terms of whether it is an attractive place to invest or not? Are you concerned about property rights? Are you concerned about whether there's enough growth or not? How do you evaluate Ukraine compared to other countries in the region, David?
Well, thank you very much for asking me.
Hang on a sec, David, we can't hear you. Can we try the sound again?
Well, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, loud and clear. You are
Okay.
hovering over my head, dominating the room.
So I'm sorry I couldn't be there today, but I appreciate being on the panel. Let me answer your question. And this is a question that a number of business people in the United States who met with your president when he was in Washington asked him as well. We wanted to invest more in Ukraine. Many people do, and many people have invested in Ukraine. We're at this meeting in Washington. I would say that right now, the investment environment around the world is relatively good, considering that COVID is still with us. As we all know, investment returns in Europe, Asia, and the United States have been relatively spectacular in most parts of the economy for the last year and a half or 2 years, despite COVID. However, because Ukraine has not participated in this growth at the same level that Western European countries have, or Europe or United States has, many people say, why should I invest in Ukraine, given the factors that we've all mentioned, which is slower growth, some of the judicial problems, corruption, and so forth. There was hope when your president became president that things would change a bit, but progress has been relatively slow. However, I would say that the Western world is really pulling for Ukraine, and there's no doubt that people in the United States would like to see Ukraine to be a more attractive place to invest, and I would like to find places to invest there myself personally, but it's been difficult to uncover the kind of opportunities we would really like. I do think that there is some progress that's being made, and I do think that there will be chances to make investments there when not everybody is looking for those investments. In other words, when everybody is looking for an investment, everybody agrees that it's great to grow, invest in a country, the prices go up. So I don't really want to tell everybody, come rush to Ukraine, because then prices will go up. But my own view is that it is an attractive place to invest. You just have to have people on the ground. You have to have some patience. You have to recognize that this is a rare situation where you're investing in a country which has foreign forces in part of the country. That's very rare. It's very rare to find it to be a stable environment when you have foreign forces in part of your country. So on the whole, I would say there are opportunities in Ukraine. The Western world is looking for those opportunities. I think it may take a while to uncover some of them, but I'm hopeful that the prices will not get too high in the future, and there will be opportunities to buy things at relatively lower prices. Let me just end this by saying, Jillian, I'd be curious if you could ask everybody, and I could ask them myself, what would be the best reason you would give to somebody why they should invest in Ukraine now? If any of you were on an investment committee and asked to assess whether Ukraine is a good place to invest relative to other places in Western Europe, other places in mid-Asia, what would be the single best reason why somebody should invest in Ukraine? I'd be curious if anybody would come forward with that answer.
Well, David, since you've been a legendary financier, you've gone on to become a quasi-journalist yourself because you're constantly hosting television programs yourself and interviewing other people. So it's always great to have you on a panel because you basically ask the better questions than me. And that is indeed something I want to ask in a moment to the rest of the panelists. Before I do, though, David, I'd like to ask you one other question.
Sure.
What signals exactly, precisely, concretna, are you looking for in order to decide that Ukraine is good for investment? What exactly would you look for in concrete terms?
Well, in my view, what I think the most important things are right now are seeing that the United States is supportive of what Ukraine is doing. A close relationship between the U.S. government and the Ukrainian government would be helpful. The IMF being as supportive as possible would be really good signs. But also, what people tend to do when they look for investments is they say, what smart investor is there? In other words, if you find really smart investors putting money in Ukraine, people will follow. And so it's not exactly dependent only on what governments are doing, but really smart people who know how to invest. If they were to put money in Ukraine today, tomorrow, or very soon, other people will follow. So I think a big effort has to be to meet with some of the leading investors in the world. People have a lot of money and are willing to put money outside the United States or outside of Western Europe. Those are the people that I think who will attract capital more than anybody from the government telling people to invest in the country.
Right, so three key criteria: good relationship between the US and Ukraine, the IMF being supportive in terms of both funding but also the overarching macro policy recommendations, and of course you can comment on that in a moment, Vladislav, and then also the sense that you've actually got something to invest in terms of sector of the economy which are growing, which plays in very well to the key theme of this panel, which is what exactly can Ukraine offer to the rest of the world, to outside investors. And the question you asked is just, why should anyone come here? Maybe I can ask you, Minister, why should anyone come to Ukraine right now? How would you sell Ukraine if you were basically on a roadshow doing a pitch to people like David?
I think that we can offer a lot to the world because we can offer something for the past, something for the future, and something for forever. Because forever we are selling grain to the world. It's from ancient Greek times. So North Black Sea was a source of supply to food to Athens. And previous year actually illustrated this, that Ukraine actually showed itself as a stable food security guarantor for Southeast Asia. And we constantly grow in our supply of wheat, corn, and other cereals to Southeast Asia. So for the future, we are offering digital services because digital services in our trade portfolio outperform energy, outperform the benefits from transit of gas. We are discussing so much these days. So we actually earn twice more from IT services than from transporting gas. And something for the past. Something for the past is steel industry, where actually Ukraine can be either partner of the developed world, US and the EU, in modernizing and creating climate-friendly steel, or we can be a raw supplier to China with its overcapacity in steel, because last year we increased supply of metal ore to China. And this is not a very pleasant choice for us because we were squeezed from EU and US markets, and this is what we are discussing with them. So in every area of economy, we have a lot to offer, to discuss to the outer world in general. That's why I think Ukraine is becoming more and more attractive as economy. Of course, the risks that have been discussed, they still exist, but from point of view of business, of what can be done, we are more and more attractive. And another last element, what we see is that pandemic actually raised the question of bringing back manufacturing closer to the markets. This open strategic autonomy of the European Union and bringing back something from China or Southeast Asia to Europe. And now we see that our long-term bet on European integration, on applying EU rules in regulatory policy, actually turns into the decisions of big corporations on choosing Ukraine as a place of manufacturing in European continent.
So basically 3 S's is what you're arguing. Steel, silicon, or digital services, and then outsourcing other services into Ukraine, essentially. Can I quickly ask you, before I turn to Aliena, as trade minister, if you look at something like steel, for example, the EU carbon border tax tariffs, the proposed tariffs, could potentially hurt the Ukraine quite badly. Do you have any comment on how discussions are going between the EU and Ukraine in terms of the carbon border tariffs?
Yeah, we are in intensive discussion. I see my colleagues here, and our Vice Prime Minister Stefanishina is actually leading this together with support of Prime Minister as well. In the forthcoming weeks, we will have exact details on this. But the biggest problem of carbon border adjustment mechanism is that it, from the EU point of view, they punish 3 states, so that's by this measure: Turkey, Russia, and Ukraine. And from point of view of climate ambition, Ukraine is a lion of the European Union in opposite to Turkey and Russia. That's why we raise a legitimate question, is that even if by any calculation, we believe that not justified calculation, but by any calculation, Ukrainian products should be covered by CBAM, but from political point of view, we should be encouraged by adherence to climate goals and climate ambitions with exclusion from this measure. This is our clear message. And once again, the message I told previously, that we would rather see us as partner of EU, steel industry, cement, fertilizers industry, or electricity industry, not a competitor, not a supplier to competitor.
Right. Well, I think we're going to have a chance for some discussion from the floor afterwards, and I'll be interested to hear an EU perspective on whether or not there is likely to be an exemption for Ukraine. But Aliena, what do you think Ukraine can offer the world? Why should somebody like David bother to look here?
This is really a very good question, Julian, and thanks for asking it. Because, as you said in the beginning, we are here in Ukraine. I used to think that the world should somehow contribute to us, not that we should contribute something to the world. And we really need to change this narrative to be a successful country. The question is not really trivial. If you think about Ukraine's economy, it's relatively small. It's number 40 in the world in terms of the GDP, if you calculate it price-adjusted PPP. And it's like 40 times smaller than the largest world economy. So we have a conflict in the East. What can we contribute? But we can't contribute, actually. As Taras said, it's a food security. So I just give you a couple of numbers. Ukraine is currently number 4 biggest exporter of corn, number 5 biggest exporter of wheat. And given the global climate change, so this is gonna kind of Ukraine's fertile soil, and the geographical position is kind of conducive to further growth. So we will not suffer much from climate change, at least in the next couple of years. And the productivity level could be increased. So we did very simple calculation. If we increase the yield by 20-25%, which will be still below the global leaders, Ukraine could become number 2 and number 3 exporter in wheat and corn. So we really can help to secure food supply in the world. Then the second point is Ukraine inherited from the Soviet Union a very strong education in in STEM, actually, in everything related to science, math, engineering, and technology. So, and now we bear fruits of this. The IT sector in Ukraine is not as big as agriculture. If you compare, like we export $5 billion of IT services and $22 billion of agricultural products. So that's a big difference. But look at the growth rates. Like IT sector has been growing by 30% on average over past 10 years. 30%. That means
wow.
that it will exceed agriculture very quickly. Agriculture was growing at 8% per year over past 10 years. So, and like our IT specialists, they could work in cybersecurity, in aerospace exploration. That's a really very broad range of professions where our specialists could contribute. And the third point, which is very close to my heart, this is macroeconomic and financial stability. We often don't really think about this when we have it. So we don't appreciate macroeconomic stability when we have it. And it's like some may sound trivial, you know, each country should care about macroeconomic stability. But Ukraine should care not only because of itself, but because of the Europe and because of the security in Europe. Because given our northern neighbor, basically Russia, and its aspirations, financial and economic instability in Ukraine may have far-reaching geopolitical consequences. So it's very important for the country to maintain macroeconomic stability and strengthen the economy further so that global shocks will not kind of hit Ukraine very sufficiently. We were discussing the climate change, you know, this AI and all these very important global risks yesterday. Very, very nice, intensive discussion. But don't forget that global economic risk is still on the agenda. You know, the debt burden in developed countries are now close to historical high. So we are very, not we, but you actually developed countries in terms of the debt to GDP ratio, they are close to the World War II level, the record high level of 120%. So that's, I mean, we have an asset bubble, we have very high commodity prices that could correct quickly. So this global economic risk is still important, and we should keep this in mind. And it's important for Ukraine, and I think for the rest of for our neighbors, for the Europe in general, to keep Ukraine a stable and safe place.
Right, so I'd say 3 more S's there, just to be a journalist and think about, you know, catchy phrases. You essentially talking about silos full of agricultural products. That's something that the Ukraine can give to the world. Very strong STEM skills, science, technology, engineering, and maths. And then stability, in the sense of some macroeconomic or financial stability and banking stability. I'm going to turn to the audience in a moment. I can see Natalia Yaresko here from the Finance Ministry, former Finance Minister, who wants to say something in a moment. Before we do, though, I quickly want to bring in Vladislav and then David, just to quickly say, do you have any comments on what you've heard from the IMF perspective?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe as a comment and maybe answer, and probably also answering David's question. So I don't disagree what Taras and Lena said. What I wanted, what I would like to have, is that on top of what we are selling, the corns, we would be able to also to produce and sell to the world the drones, who are used very much in
drones.
Drones.
Okay,
yeah.
That's not an S. Think of a way to describe a drone with an S.
I mean, for the agriculture, you know.
Surveillance.
I would like, on top of metal, which we are producing and selling to the world, you know, to be able to produce robots, you know, which are used in the, for example, car industry, you know. And I'm not against of even like a digital services in the country, which we're trying to you know, to develop, and I think it's a very good development. But we need to be able to sell to the world much more. Not only our human resources or human hours of our programmers. We need to sell more products to the world, and maybe one day, instead of selling, you know, the metal or maybe, you know, tubes, you know, maybe Victor or others will be able to invest in the biggest, I don't know, AI center in the world, in Europe. And maybe this center could also work not only on some products, but raising the topics on ethics of AI. So the questions there, so we already have a big platform to develop and to offer to the world, but we need to do more. And here, I mean, just to add what was said, I mean, one of the elements which we're speaking during the last few days is a security. It's not only stability, but also security. And it's not only security on the border, you know, but security from, for example, cybersecurity and fighting counter propaganda, you know. And again, here we could offer to the world something, our not only expertise, but our field, and inviting other experts from the world to be here, to stay with us, and to work on that, you know, to fight with a Russian propaganda, for example. This will help a lot to the world. But maybe answering also to David, you know, the president works hard, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, to improve the relations with US. Was his first factor. The Prime Minister, I helped him and the Central Bank to deal with the IMF. And probably, the privatization ministry, privatization agency, works in order to increase the number of assets. But here I fully agree with Elena, who said that the most important thing is the judicial, in order to private sector also to contribute to this growth. It's not about state. And these are the assets where I hope David will be able to invest.
Right. Well, before I turn to Natalie Yaresko, I'd like to go back to David. Now, you have looked around the world at a lot of high-tech investments. You're keenly aware of the situation in China and Taiwan. I'm curious, would you be up for investing in Ukrainian drones or Ukrainian AI platforms or Ukrainian security systems? Because I remember very clearly, I think it was 3 years ago, hearing some executives from Google's arm Jigsaw, who'd just come back from the Donbass, where they'd been looking at the relationship between kinetic and cyber warfare, learning lessons there about how cyber and kinetic warfare can interact, and then taking that elsewhere. So there clearly is an area of security experience, tragic security experience, which could be turned into commercial propositions. But David, are you up for buying a few Ukrainian drones?
Well, of course, drones have military implications and civilian implications, and most investors are not rushing to publicly say they want to invest in defense-related drones for all kinds of public relations reasons. But you all raise a very good point. And you have the old economy, the traditional Ukrainian economy, which is agriculture or export-related, grain-related kinds of things, and the other things we talked about. The best way that some countries have been able to get a capital to come in from the West and other parts of the world is to reinvent themselves and say, we actually are a tech center. Everybody wants to be the next Silicon Valley. China has done a pretty good job of this. Other countries have as well. I would suggest Ukraine to say, look, we have the traditional economy, and that's not going to be moving that quickly in terms of growth. It'll be good. Maybe there's some opportunities to make investments there. But the best way to attract foreign capital quickly is to say we are a tech center. We have AI. We have brilliant STEM-related young entrepreneurs. And you'll see money coming much more quickly, in part because it's not government-related. If you have an entrepreneurial economy, you don't have to deal with the government quite as much. So I would suggest reinventing parts of the economy in terms of public relations and saying, look, we have this young economy. We are entrepreneurial. We are tech-focused. We have incredibly talented young people, and we are really building nice new companies. Some of them may be drone-related. Many of them may be AI-related. That's where I think you'll attract capital. And again, getting some great investors who are tech-oriented to visit Ukraine would be a big plus forward. If you can read that some of the best-known tech investors have gone off to Ukraine and they're doing a visit there and they're putting money there, that is going to attract enormous amounts of additional capital. And that's where I would put some of my emphasis if I was in charge of trying to get capital into Ukraine. And I'd be happy to come along and visit with others as well.
Right. Well, San Francisco has Silicon Valley. Los Angeles has Silicon Beach. I guess the question now is, what would you call something in Ukraine if you wanted a Silicon something sector? Maybe we should have a competition on what to call Silicon Field, Silicon Maidan, or whatever. But I'd like to bring in Natalie Yaresko here, the former finance minister, to comment on what you see the key strengths are of Ukraine. How would you sell Ukraine to David or anyone else at the moment? Or any other comments you have on the conversation so far? And then anyone else who'd like to come in with comments or questions, please do signal me as we are hearing from Natalie's comments.
Thank you very much. And I come at this with two hats. One is former Minister of Finance and trying to create that macroeconomic stability, but the other as a former private equity player here, having had my own private equity firm and having been on the road year after year raising capital to invest in Ukraine. And so I understand how hard it is to sell, quote unquote, Ukraine in both worlds, both the government and the private sector. And the bottom line is we have been talking about the same opportunities and potentials for 30 years. Some of them are a little bit newer in terms of our potential in the cyber area or the digital services area. But bottom line, I bet everyone in this room would agree that for 30 years we have had no doubt about the economic opportunity and the potential of this country, from agriculture to metallurgy, from minerals to IT, from human capital to our geographic location. It's never been a problem to describe to someone what our opportunities and our potential are. And when anyone arrives here, especially now after COVID, it's perfectly clear that the economy is actually quite alive, at least in Kiev. I haven't been outside of Kiev this trip. And it's shockingly alive. And yet, foreign direct investment numbers are abysmal.
Negative.
I was trying to be kind. Foreign direct investment numbers are abysmal, and large investors aren't coming here, Carlyle's and others like Carlyle. So what is it? And it comes down, in my opinion, to one issue, and it's rule of law. Rule of law, because rule of law is the court system. Rule of law is anti-corruption. Rule of law is stability, predictability, it's consistency. Rule of law is the missing piece. And when the outside world believes there's no rule of law, they don't rush to come here and do IT projects. In fact, Ukrainians leave to other environments where there is rule of law and protection of intellectual property rights to develop that expertise. So Firefly, Ukrainian entrepreneur. I mean, there is just no limitation to seeing how it's a single issue that keeps our economy from the level of growth. Not that this is bad, I agree. It's not bad to have 3-4% growth, but you want a lot more. And the people deserve a lot more. So the question to everyone, private sector, IMF, and government, is the same. What is it going to take? We are more than proud of our country. We are more than confident of everything it offers. We see for those who are investing here that they can be profitable and they can operate, notwithstanding the rest. And yet, there's one issue that stops this from being Silicon Maidan. How does the private sector and the government and the IMF and the international organizations, how do we change the fact that there is no rule of law?
Well, that's a great question. And I'm going to do something slightly unusual here and make sure that everyone here is awake. Thank you for not talking anymore. And I'm going to take an audience vote. Who in the room is confident that in 2 years' time, the situation with the rule of law in Ukraine will be better than it currently is? Hands up, anyone who thinks that the situation is improving and is better. Well, you're kind of paid to say that anyway, but...
I have the answers for this why.
I'd say better, not fixed. I wasn't even going to ask about fixed, okay? Who thinks it may be worse?
Yeah, while the people are raising their hands, I know why I feel that it will be better, because now we have this summer we have unique situation that first time for 7 years, I think that our parliament adopted the most radical judicial measures for reform, so that were actually some kind were weaker in previous years, in previous 7 years. So this summer the judicial laws were, I think, that the most radical, most open for reform. And the second thing is that now more than 50% of judicial headcounts, so the judicial positions, are vacant. They need to be filled with new judges, with rules that are really the best for the last 7 years at least. So that's why the real chance for improvement of rule of law in Ukraine is now one of the best ones. So that's why I so strongly believe that in 2 years it will be
So you're
better.
an optimist. I see that Natalia is not. Can you tell us why you're not optimistic? I see also our host is not very optimistic either. He may wish to comment or not.
So I think one of the conversations we just had at this conference about de-oligarchization, I have to say that slowly, is an example of why I don't believe it's going to get better, but I think it's going to get worse. It's about rule of law and application of law equally to everyone. It's not about picking out those that we dislike. It's not about picking out those that are wealthy or wealthier. It's about the same rules that exist everywhere else, the same anti-monopoly, antitrust legislation. It's about the same access to the courts. Someone said earlier today that oligarchs exist because they need to protect their businesses. Well, what about everyone else that does business here? Everyone else needs to protect themselves too, and they're not oligarchs. Rule of law corruption is rampant here. It's small scale, it's medium scale, it's large scale. It's not oligarchs alone. I mean, we were phrasing it the wrong way. If you want entrepreneurial activity, right? We want entrepreneurial activity to translate into value-added manufacturing and services. How do we convince a young entrepreneur to do business here, that he can manage in this environment? And with all due respect, laws are passed, and laws have been passed for 30 years. It's the implementation, the execution, and the consistency of that implementation and execution that our own entrepreneurs, I'm not talking about oligarchs, fear is not the case and not happening. And if Ukrainians have to leave the country to protect their intellectual property rights, if Ukrainians have to, then what do we expect of Carlyle coming here?
Well, so many questions. I can see everyone's now awake, which is fabulous. Okay, the IMF, tell us.
Immediate comment here, what Taras said. I also see there the opportunity, about the judges, except, but for this, we need not to have any compromise, in selection of the judges. And therefore, there should be institutional process. And this is a part of IMF program, how to improve the selection of judges. This is very much important. This is also about the corruption, anti-corruption, and this is about no compromise with, anti-corruption institutions. And this is a part of IMF program now, and here, about the rule of law, I strongly agree that this is the major problem in the country. It's already for a few years. I think how to go and how to fix it, I'm not sure if it was in the book of Darren, where he was explaining how the rule of law has been built in England, and the concept was the following. The elites created the judicial system or rule of law for them and later disseminated it to people, instead of other system where the elites may develop the rule of law for others and create the exclusions for themselves. I think here we really need to go to the direction of building the rule of law for the elites, that all people should be equal to the law, as Natalka now said. And I should be very frank, I said a few years ago to one very important person in this country that the most important weapon in his life he should build is a weapon against himself. Because this is what would make the leadership in the country accountable, and this will increase the trust. We also were discussing trust to institutions, which we were discussing before in other panels today.
Right. I'm sure Elena wants to say something. Before I do, can I quickly turn to a point from the audience? And again, if anyone else wants to make comments, please.
I'll be quick. Orisa Lutseva, Chatham House. One thing I didn't hear, and I wish I had, was green economy. Because, Ukraine, again, will be squeezed between a neighbor that denies climate change and the club of prosperous nations that is embarking on this change. And here it actually brings back our future will depend what will happen with the vested interest in Ukraine. I'm not using the difficult word, because they, in a way, are capturing part of the economy that doesn't want to see the green change. Where are we going to find new capital and new forces to bring forward this agenda? Because otherwise, environment will also become geopolitics. Thank you.
That's a very, very good point.
May I jump in? Because actually, I tried to reply to Gillian's question on carbon border adjustment mechanism about our climate ambitions. And I think that this is the source, this is example where I see in my daily work that actually old industries, which are used to be treated as oligarch-owned industries, are thinking about how to become climate neutral. So this is Ukrainian domestic agenda, that what we believe as old industries owned by people who are treated as a vested interest, they think about how to be climate neutral. And this is broader question, broader than climate. This is about the request for to be treated as respectable business by Ukrainian businessmen from different range. We see this in agriculture, because in agriculture we used to promote ourselves as exporter of millions tons of wheat or corn. But everyone is conscious that price for Ukrainian corn is cheapest in the world, because we are treated as a garbage business, so that it's bad. It has bad image. So now, in order to sell the same volume with higher price, you need to be respectable. You need to have a proper documents, proper understanding of the quality of products as well. The same for for steel, the same for electricity and other industries which are now the, let's say, avant-garde of climate transformation. So that's why I think that in reality, domestic agenda on business development, a part of rule of law and macro financial stability, is absolutely actual. And what was discussed yesterday, for example, about on the session on China, US, Russia, etc., it is about Ukraine, because we trade with everyone. So our core trade partner is the European Union, 41%. But last year, the biggest growth from Ukraine was to China, 100%. It's something enormous when you can twice your export. And at the same time, with the United States, we have absolutely strange trade, because the biggest item of export of Ukraine to the United States are digital services, more than $1 billion US. And what we import from the United States? Used cars, which actually spoil our air in the cities, and coal, the outdated products. So these are two biggest items which the United States are selling to Ukraine. So Ukraine now is more future-oriented than the US from this perspective. So we now, to sum up this speech, is that in reality, what I see is that Ukrainian business is more conscious about global agenda. That's why we will be really attractive for investments, given the discussion about rule of law seriously.
Well, it sounds to me like you should try and persuade Elon Musk to start building electric cars in Ukraine, or better still, get a local homegrown version of an electric car made in Ukraine with, green electricity. But David, do you have any investments in Ukraine at the moment from Carlyle?
At the moment, we do not, in part because there hasn't been a lot of the opportunity to invest there. Some of our companies do operate there. In other words, we have lots of companies that operate there because they have facilities and so forth, but we don't have a specific Ukrainian investment. However, I would like to be able to say something different by next year. So if I'm invited back next year and I can be there in person, I hope somebody will bring me an opportunity between now and next year where I can invest there, or Carlyle can invest there, or I can invest personally there, because I do think there are a lot of attractive opportunities. But clearly the rule of law is the elephant in the room. I didn't want to say it myself because I'm not there and I'm not Ukrainian, though my ancestors are Ukrainian. But I do think that the rule of law and the corruption issues are the biggest problems that Ukraine has in attracting Western capital. Everything else can be dealt with. Those are the biggest problems for sure. And nobody's going to solve that problem overnight. So we just have to recognize that. We have to move more slowly on that. That's not going to be solved quickly. However, if somebody has a good opportunity, bring it to me, david.rubenstein@carlyle.com. I'm ready to go.
I think that's an invitation to get your email box flooded with emails. But Aliena, I realized I meant to turn to you earlier. Do you have any comments on this before we bring in Veloslav again?
Well, probably I will also comment on why I'm more optimistic about the Ukraine's future and about the rule of law. And actually, this is based on the past, on the experience that we had over the past 7 years. Actually, in 2014, I wouldn't expect Ukraine's economy to be in such a good shape as it is now. Yes, we have reserves at 9-year high, like it more than 5 months of imports. We have a debt to GDP ratio of 50%, which is very low by even international standards. So we have the economy which is suffered very, I would say, very little from the what was one of the deepest global downturn last year. So, and this is partially because of reforms, because of what we saw, the changes that we saw in the central bank, in the banking system. And I wouldn't expect our banking system to shrink twice because of all non-viable banks were actually sent out of the system, yes. Well, I see that the civil society remains strong, and I see that reversing the changes is actually is really difficult. So, and I see the good intention from some part of the authorities, I would say, to continue these reforms. Like the reformers are still there, and they work hard. And also, we do have an external support, and this external support remains very critical, despite the good economic situation, despite the fact that we don't really need the financial resources at the moment, this year. We are not very much dependent on the financial support right in the moment. We do need this support to keep reforms on track, and I think this support will continue.
Vladislav.
Yeah, I just wanted maybe to respond what David just said and leverage on what has been discussed before. I think one of the industries or one of the directions which we have not discussed now yet is logistics. You know, Ukraine has a perfect geographical position, and if to leverage on three elements, the first, the president started building roads, you know, or at least the pushes for building roads, which creates, you know, the road infrastructure through the country. Second is what Taras just said about China. China is increasing investment, but also China is looking how to bring faster, you know, the goods in Europe. And we are in a perfect position why Odessa port cannot be a better port than, for example, Constanza, or to have something Baltic states ports. So China is here, and we as IMF, you know, we're working also to improve the tax and customs in the country. Hopefully somebody will deal with also road police, you know. But factually, if you have these, you have the roads, you have the infrastructure, you have the clients, you have a geographical position, and you have a normal way just to bring fast goods to Europe. So the area where to invest is clear the ports. You know, this is the area where, you know, the David should look at, you know, and there are ports in Ukraine, you know, where the seaports, you know, in Odessa or nearby, this is the area where, you know, these should be the potential opportunities.
So David, do you want to buy a port if you don't buy a drone?
Well, I'm looking for returns where I can get high teen net returns, 15 to 20% per annum. If somebody has something like that, let me know. I would also say that of all the things I've commented on today, the thing I should have said is the best moderator I've seen is Gillian Tett. So Gillian, you did a great job in a difficult environment, and I highly recommend that everybody read your new book, because I did read it and it's excellent.
Oh,
so
thank you.
Thank you for inviting me, and I hope to be there in person next year.
David, before you go, Flattery will get you a free lunch at some point. We can talk about your new book, which is coming out soon, which I'm sure is going to be terrific. I have one other quick question that I think everyone in the room would love to know the answer to. When you met President Zelensky, did what he said, so the things he said, did that convince you any more to look at Ukraine as an investment destination? Were you impressed or not?
I think he did a very good job. I had met him before, shortly after he was elected, when I was in Ukraine last year. I would say he did a very good job with the business people we had in Washington, D.C., all of whom, most of whom were investors in Ukraine. And then he went off to meet with President Biden. And that meeting, I think, went pretty well. So I think he did a good job. But nobody overnight can get people to put money into in any country. It takes a while. And so I do think it's going to be a process. But again, entrepreneurial activity will attract money more quickly than government-related programs, because smart money wants to follow smart entrepreneurs more than smart government programs.
Well, thank you. Well, I think it's been a fascinating discussion. I mean, just to go back to my journalistic, rather pat framing, I've heard about half a dozen S's, which are Ukraine's strength, whether it's agricultural silos full of produce like corn and wheat, steel, whether it's silicon, whether it's STEM, whether it's your security apparatus, and whether it's your financial or banking stability, relative stability. Those are all strengths. But as we heard from Natalie so forcefully, the question of the rule of law, of property rights, of intellectual property rights really is, at best, work in progress. And I noticed that probably there was a majority of people who thought that it is improving, but it wasn't a very confident majority. There remains a lot of work to be done. So thank you to the three of you in taking part. Thank you, David, for hovering over our heads like the voice of God. You are about to be besieged with pitches from Ukrainian entrepreneurs. And I now hand over to Carl Bildt, who I think is going to be summarizing what we have said and the conclusions. So thank you.